I met in 2002, and I'm sure he remembers it, he might not remember the circumstances under which we met, but he was the guest speaker at a literary festival, and the host of the literary festival had a bit too much to drink. And he was the guest speaker, and the host, quite early on into his speech, told him to shut up and sit down, and it became very awkward. Do you remember that? And we had to try and...
I was there too.
Yes. You only think of what to answer much later, don't you? Sometimes in those circumstances. I was going to say, I thought you Aussies were so informal.
So very good to see you both again. I hope there'll be no interruptions today, David. No one's been drinking, as far as I know. This afternoon is to talk about a book by Carlos Morais. It is, and I think those of you who know me know I'm not a sort of person who gushes, but I really do think this is an extraordinary novel. I was very flattered to be asked by Ricardo Pinto to write the preface to the book, and I said yes without reading it, and then read the book and was initially extremely intimidated by it because it is an extraordinary novel. I don't want to give too much away, I'll leave that to the author, but it is a novel which is about literature, it's about guilt, it's about envy, it's about Macau, it's about poetry. I don't read Portuguese, so I cannot comment on the original Portuguese, which I believe was published last year. But I must say, the translation by David Brookshaw is also quite extraordinary. The novel covers various historical periods, begins in the 19th century, and it covers different voices. The opening speaker is an Englishman. One of the speakers is an Irishman. One of the speakers is, I assume, a Portuguese priest. And one of the speakers is a Portuguese poet, a Portuguese poet, an adventurer in the 16th century. So you have these multi-layered voices, these multi-layered discourses, and I really think both the author and the translator are astonishing in how they capture the different historical voices in the way they write. I think this novel adds an enormous amount to the very limited number of books about Macau. I can't speak about Macau literature in Portuguese, but Macau has been very, very, very badly served in terms of the English novel. There are very, very few books about Macau in English which are any good. I can think of two. This book is originally in Portuguese, but I think it will come to stand on its own as a novel in its own right in English as well, because of the quality of the translation. I think this will really add, but I don't want to just emphasize the Macau-ness of the novel, because the novel's about much, much more than Macau. It's not a Macau novel. Macau forms a part of the novel, but it's about much more than that. Only a small part of the novel takes place in Macau. Without giving too much away, I think we can say one of the main voices of the novel is that of Camões, the great Portuguese poet. And by happy coincidence, actually, somebody in the audience this afternoon, Elio Alves from the University of Macau, is an authority on Camões and happened to be a friend of Landig White, who is probably the most important translator of Camões in English in the 20th century. So I hope you will add something to the conversation later. I suppose my opening question really is, amongst Portuguese scholars, I know there is some debate about whether the Camões ever came to Macau or not. From a Portuguese point of view, given how the diminishing place of Portuguese in Macau now, how how Sinicization is becoming stronger and stronger. How important is it to claim Macau as a place for Camões? How important is Macau as a base for Camões, given that Macau is slightly being edged out from the Portuguese landscape as China, as the Greater Bay Area encroaches ever more onto where we are?
Oh, you listening? Okay. First, I would like to say that this is not an acknowledgement. This is really gratitude that I feel for Ricardo Pinto, that have the initiative to make this novel translated, to David Brookshaw, who made an extraordinary translation. When I read translations, for me the most important part is the tone. If the translator can get the tone of the original writing in another language. Because we know all the stories have been told, all the situations have been described, but it's the style of the author that really finally marks a work, marks an oeuvre. And thanks to this translation, I think my style was correctly translated to English. And I think this is so difficult. If I want to do this in the opposite way, it would be difficult for me. But David Brookshaw made it so beautifully. I'm really, my gratitude. And then my gratitude to the great reader that is Glenn Timmermans, and the beautiful preface he wrote about this book that shows that he really got deep into the book and understood different ways that this book contained of interpretation and of enjoyment, I hope. Going to your question, okay, the presence of Camões in Macau is it's so important, and I would say it's more important maybe because it's a myth. It doesn't matter really if there was an historical presence, but what we know, this myth exists since the 17th century, which means not a long time after Camões died. Suddenly appeared a story in Macau that he was here before, and that it was in the Camões Grotto that a big part of his Lusíads were written. And for us, the literary Portuguese people that live in Macau, of course, we always have these footsteps to reassure us of our own presence here. And the Camões Grotto is the symbol of the Portuguese presence in Macau. Not the Mount Fortress, not the cannons that were never really used against the Chinese, for instance, but the Camões Grotto is the center from our presence was justified. And why was this important? Because it's poetry and love. It's not colonialism and war. And as we know, the Portuguese presence in Macau was never one of violence or confrontation with the Chinese, but it was a presence more or less of encounter and good relationship and love too. And the proof of that is the existence of a large Macanese community. So the Grotto of Camões is one of the most, I would say, the most important place in the history of Lusophone literature, because it's in the end of the world, it's in the end of our world, seen from a Western perspective. It was in the end of our world that the greatest writer of Portuguese language lived and make poetry and make love, because poetry is love. So that is why the Camões Grotto is so important as a symbol, and I would love that all our guests and all the people that never been there go there, because it's a magic place, especially by the way it is used today. Today you have a lot of old Chinese people around listening to Chinese opera, which I think is delightful. Camões would love it to know about this, that there are people there even sometimes singing Chinese opera over there, always listening on radios or recorders. And you know, there is an ambience there, there is an atmosphere that I think is, I feel very proud as a Portuguese that I come to China, and the most important place that the Portuguese have here is this place. It's a grotto which is motherly. Also, there is a kind of a motherly thing about the grotto, right? We go inside to rest. So I can admit Camões was, say, in the arms of the earth, in a grotto, in a womb, a kind of a womb, that allowed him to make poetry, because I'm not going to explain this, but the fact writing poetry has a lot of do with being in a womb. And so this grotto is this feminine place, this protection place where you can feel protected, and at the same time where everything comes, from where creation is born. So that's how I see the Camões grotto in Macau, and what makes me proud to be Portuguese in Macau. One of the things that makes me proud is exactly this grotto and its existence and its importance.
One of the things I mentioned in the preface, and again, there might be other examples, I'll be curious if you can think of any, but what makes Portugal unusual is that its national day is the day commemorating a poet. The Portuguese national day is Camões Day. It's the day of the day commemorates the death of a poet. Most national days are probably days when you become independent or a great military victory. But it's interesting that Portugal, possibly alone, I don't know, there might be other countries, and therefore I suppose even in the Portuguese imagination, there is an association, because most Portuguese would associate, because of that myth, Macau with Camões. And so there is that tie, the national day with Macau.
Yes. Well, I don't know why the Portuguese choose to have Camões, the Day of the Dead at Camões, which is actually a very sad day, because it was at the same time that Portugal lost independence. So it was a terrible year for the nation. As a nation, Camões famously dies saying, "I die and the fatherland dies with me," and it was true. I don't know if he really said that, or he speak about his lost love in the seas of China, Dinaman, I don't know, but the myth says that when he died. So I don't know why the Portuguese choose to have his national day on such a